Civilizations that never met describe the same creature, not once, not twice, but again and again. Across ancient China, Europe, and Mesopotamia, records speak of massive winged beings, serpentine bodies, and fire or light descending from the sky. These descriptions appeared long before global travel, long before shared language, and long before these cultures had any reason to tell the same story. Ancient texts did not treat dragons as fantasy. They were recorded alongside wars, rulers, and natural disasters, as if they were they lived in. Different lands describe the same wings, the same elongated body, the same presence in the sky. Even the behavior feels familiar. Guarding territory, appearing near mountains or water, vanishing without explanation. It almost feels symbolic, because symbolism usually changes. Stories evolve, details fade, but these descriptions didn't. Some accounts are too precise, too consistent, too detailed to be dismissed as imagination, and that's where the pattern begins to break. Because some ancient records describe dragons not as symbols, but as observations. Those records were never meant to survive, and they lead to something even stranger. The next story continues this mystery. Ancient records did not survive by accident. What we read today is only a fraction of what once existed. Libraries burned, archives collapsed, manuscripts disappeared without explanation. What remained was filtered, copied, approved. But some texts did not fit. These records describe creatures not through symbolism, but through behavior and consequence. They noted where these beings appeared, how people reacted, what changed afterward. In several manuscripts, the language is restrained, measured, almost administrative. There is no attempt to impress the reader, no dramatic framing, no poetic exaggeration, just documentation. Some texts describe how settlements were relocated after encounters, how travel routes were altered, how warnings were issued to those who came later, not as legends, but as instructions. In certain accounts, scribes recorded specific conditions, weather patterns, times of year, geographic markers, as if trying to predict recurrence. This is not how myths are written. Myths explain meaning. These records track risk, and risk requires memory. What becomes troubling is how consistently these details appear. Across regions, across centuries, different authors, different cultures, yet the structure remains the same. Description, reaction, aftermath. When later historians encountered these texts, they struggled to categorize them, too detailed to dismiss, too unsettling to preserve. So many were reclassified, labeled as allegory, or removed from official history altogether. Some survived only as fragments, marginal notes, references without context, disconnected from their original narrative. When these fragments are placed side by side, a pattern begins to form, not a story, a system. A way ancient societies recorded phenomena they could not control, and that system quietly disappears from historical records. Not because the encounter stopped, but because the framework used to record them was no longer acceptable. What replaced it was myth, simpler, safer, easier to dismiss. But the original texts still point forward, because similar descriptions appear again, not in ancient languages, but in modern reports. That is where this mystery continues. Some of these texts reveal an unusual concern with repetition. They do not simply record an event, they attempt to track when it might happen again. Margins include notes about cycles, intervals, unusual conditions that preceded previous encounters. This suggests anticipation, not fear-driven storytelling, but preparation. In certain regions, scribes compared earlier records with the newer ones. They looked for similarities, for shared patterns. This comparison implies continuity, an assumption that the phenomenon did not belong to the past alone. Yet these analytical elements rarely appear in later copies. They vanish. Later versions simplify language, they remove conditions, they erase sequences. What remains is narrative, but narrative was not the original purpose. The original purpose was memory. Memory of something that disrupted daily life, something that required adjustment. That memory becomes inconvenient over time. As societies change, so do the stories they choose to preserve. Uncomfortable records are reframed. Complex documents are reduced. Eventually, only symbolic versions survive. But symbolism leaves traces, traces that feel misplaced when compared to the earliest sources. That disconnect raises an important question. If these texts were always meant as myth, why did their earliest versions read like logs? Why measure, record, compare? Those actions suggest experience, and experience suggests encounter, which brings